All right, all right. Welcome everybody to another episode of Hot Seat Automotive Podcast. Your buddy CJ here. We're talking about all things automotive, gearhead stuff, real gearhead talk here. This is the place to be. And guys, what an exciting episode we got today. I'm excited. My friend Glen. I have known Glen for years. He has been a mentor. He was my boss at one point, which Glen, I'm having you sworn to silence. No stories about what a bad team member I was, employee. But we became fast friends. We share so many things. We could probably talk for hours, but this guy is also a lifelong gearhead. He's a heck of a guy. Love talking to this guy. I miss you, Glen. He's also into music. We could go on and on. Glen, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, CJ. Thanks for having me. Hey, I've got three characters for you. Y2K. Anyway, we can move on from there.
Guys, Glen and I spent Y2K together. Y2K, for you young people, that's the year 2000.
Yeah.
And it's not because we were partying in Times Square. It's because we both were working in IT for a large media company, and we had to make sure that the world didn't blow up on January 1st. Right, Glen?
We saved the world, for sure.
Well, you did. I think I was eating pizza and popcorn. No, but listen, let's get into this. Glen, because
Let's go.
when did you realize you were nuts about cars?
Oh, man. So I have been nuts about cars just about my entire life, I'd have to say. I was 2 or 3 years old when I saw George Barris cars being displayed in a mall in Northern California, the Munsters coach and Dragula and probably some other cars, Dean Jeffries cars or whatever. And as a 3-year-old looking at these, candy colored dreamboats, I mean, it was incredible. So it's been a long time.
Okay. Where did you grow up, Glen? And what was the car scene like when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I've grown up in a few different places. So I started life in New York. My family moved to California in the mid '60s. When I was young, I was 2, 3 years old, and we were there for several years before we moved back to New York. So, my youngest impressions are from Northern California, but I really have to say that I grew up in New York. Just about 25 miles north of New York City on the Hudson River, a small town. High school was 140 kids, graduating class. So it was a small town. And, the car culture was pretty good there, actually. Yeah, that's my Roadster.
What are we looking at? I have so many questions. Glen,
Yeah.
What's happening in this photo? Who is that guy?
Yeah, that's a guy from another world. So I lived in Southern California for a period of time, and that's my 1931 Model A Roadster on deuce rails. It was real steel all around, and I actually bought that car at Raceway Park in Englishtown, New Jersey, before I'd moved to Southern California. I was there with a friend for the Nationals, and we were watching some drag racing, and we were wandering around the parking lot. And that car was there. It didn't look anything like it does here. It was, a totally different car. I moved to California sometime later, probably a year later, and got into the street rod scene in Southern California. Met a lot of friends, had a great time, and joined a car club. I've got the license plate thing here, the old timers of West LA in Santa Monica, which is where I was living, and built that car out. Really, just restored it from the ground up as the street rod you saw in that picture.
What was that like, man? Because first of all, that car, the street rod. Secondly, when I think about West Coast car scene, I didn't live it. I've been out there, but I start thinking. I have like visions in my mind of like American Graffiti and just car clubs, guys that are just all about it, living that life. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, it's just like that. Just as you described it, guys living their lives around cars. There was something to do with cars every day and every night there. There was there was a cruise night somewhere every night, and I took full advantage of that. I drove that Roadster all around Southern California to different cruise nights, and on the weekends, met up with friends and went to different shops, hot rod shops, and just to chew the fat and hang out, and it was a lot of fun. Driving up and down the coast. At the time, I was single, so meeting girls on the beach and hanging out in the Roadster. It was definitely a lifestyle.
I'm going to show you something else, and you got to tell me what this means.
Yeah,
and
I sent CJ a bunch of pictures. So
yeah, we prepped.
We did. Yeah, my life in cars.
What the heck are we looking at here?
I knew you were going to pull that up. Okay. So that list of cars that I sent you, it's 20 something cars long. I'd actually owned more cars than were on that list, and in many cases multiple examples of each car, and that's what you're seeing here. So when this is in New York, obviously there's snow on the ground. My parents sold their house and moved into an apartment, and I went along with them. This was shortly after I graduated high school. And these are two of the cars that were in my fleet at that time. That's a Datsun 1200. I had another one that was running, and that was the rotten out parts car. And that's
it could be worse. You could have told us that this was the nice one, but the 914 is yours also.
Yeah, the 914 was mine also, and you can see the fender flares on that. That was a real monster car. It never really ran well. Most of the cars that I've had were rust buckets, right? They were Flintstone mobiles. And, these aren't far from the way the operational cars looked, the licensed and tagged and insured cars looked. But, I kept them going. It was fun to wrench on them. I always liked interesting cars, not just foreign cars. You saw the hot rod. I would consider myself more of a street rod guy than a sports car guy, though I love sports cars and I've owned a bunch of them. But this was the bane of my parents' existence at the apartment building. The neighbors complained bitterly about my collection of junk at the end of the parking lot and occupying too many spaces, and they would get complaints frequently.
I bet. And let's talk about the 914 for a moment.
Sure.
I remember being a kid, and what did we do before Auto Trader and bring a trailer? We opened up the classifieds, and we looked for cars. Who's selling what? And do I have any money from cutting lawns and waiting tables? I remember Porsche 914s coming up a lot back in the day. I'm talking about the 80s. Cheap. And I envisioned myself pulling up to high school in my Porsche 914. My father did not share that vision, unfortunately. But yeah, man. So and I saw the fender flares on that. So you used to track that thing?
No, it was never tracked. That was just a beater. That particular car was never licensed, never tagged. I never actually drove it on the street. I had another one that was actually pretty nice. That I bought in New Jersey and actually ran pretty well and had a nice paint job on it and was really nice. So that was the car that got out. This car I bought, like you said, these cars were in the penny saver for, hundreds of dollars. You could, I think I probably paid $500 for that thing. And the Datsun 1200, I probably paid $50 for that just to get it out of somebody's yard. Right. And my really nice 914, I think that was like $1,200. So these cars were plentiful. They were all over the place. parts were everywhere for them.
Right.
You could go to the local parts shop and buy a whole muffler system for a Volkswagen or an air-cooled Porsche, and and swap them out in your driveway. You pull the engine on that thing in your driveway. Those were so easy to work on.
Right.
The 914s, they were really cool cars. That mid-engine, concept. That was the scheduled to be the replacement for the Carmen Ghia, and Porsche kind of kept it for itself.
Yeah.
Wisely, right? Based on the Type 4 VW power plant. The things weren't blindingly fast, but they were sure a lot of fun. And, and I certainly had a lot of fun in it. The T-tops were tremendous. It was always great to pull that roof panel off.
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. Now, were you a Volkswagen bus guy? Do I understand that correct? What's the old saying? If that van's rocking, what's that smoke coming out of the
don't come a knocking.
VW bus. Glen in a VW bus. That I would pay to see.
Yeah. So my first car was a VW bus. So I have an older brother. He's 9 years older than me. And when we moved to New York from California, he kind of stayed behind in California to finish his junior year of high school, and he came back for his senior year. And then a couple of years after that, he left. But during the time he was living, with the family in New York, he was also a mechanic and loved to, tinker around with cars, and was a Volkswagen guy. He bought a 64 Bug that needed an engine. He rebuilt the engine in the garage and built that car basically in our garage. And when he left, I inherited a garage full of Volkswagen parts, single port engines and stuff. So my first car was a 65 Volkswagen bus. I think I paid $100 for it, probably worth 50 grand today, but I paid $100 for it. It needed everything. Rusty brakes, terrible body, rotten, to the core, but still, it was there. So I built an engine for it. I was 16. I started this project when I was 15, and I built the engine for it, bought all the tools. I had a job, bought all the tools. I think I spent, a whopping, $170 on tools, and probably, $150 getting the parts machined and buying all the parts I needed to rebuild the engine, put it in, and the thing ran. And, that was a big learning experience, a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, kind of goes along with the 914, those simple engines, simple but temperamental engines, and the sharing of components across the various Volkswagens back then just lent itself well to kind of, shade tree mechanics, driveway mechanics, rebuild the engine with a case of beer and a couple of buddies on a Friday night.
Yeah, exactly. You could pull those things, and I used to do this. I've had a bunch of Volkswagens. I had a 66 Bug. I had a 71 Bus, not listed on that sheet I gave you, a 72 Bug. So I've the Volkswagens, I could pull those engines in probably 15 minutes. And I know they used to have competitions for that too. Guys could pull engines in like a minute and a half or something like that.
What? Talk to me about your wildest road trip. Maybe not what made it wild, but what were you driving? You talked about cruises along the coast in California.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything cooler. Has Glenn been on any killer, car guy road trips?
Oh, I've been on a lot of killer road trips. So I'll just, as an aside, one of the jobs I had, in my youth was driving a tractor trailer. And it wasn't a traditional tractor trailer job. I worked for a company, and the guy wanted to go into the trucking business. So he sent another guy and I out, we're in our early 20s, to go buy a tractor trailer. And, we looked like kids. We walked into a Kenworth dealer and bought an anteater, the slope nose Kenworths.
Yeah.
So I drove that thing 40,000 miles in the first 6 months. But for cars, I had a Porsche 944 that I drove from Santa Monica up to Eugene, Oregon to visit my brother a couple of times. I had an Alfa Romeo. I think I sent you this picture, an Alfa Romeo GTV6 that I crossed the country with. I drove that. I bought that up in the valley, and it ran, but it overheated. So I had to have the engine on that rebuilt. And that was an experience, and that was a really wonderful car too. I don't know if you've got that picture, but
I don't have that one handy.
okay, all right. So so that one I drove from Santa Monica all the way here to Westchester County, New York, and it was in the wintertime. So through the Rockies and the Colorado Rockies, through the snow and ice, and it was a miserable winter, but a great drive. And the car did really well in that weather. I never got stuck anywhere, and made it, in just a few days. I didn't do any sightseeing. It was too cold, but the car held together nicely. It was a great machine. The Alfa Romeo GTV6, really just comfortable cruising machine. Yeah, that's a GTV6.
Yeah, that's not your GTV6, but
no, that's not mine.
That's pretty much the car, right?
Yeah, that is the car. Yeah.
Yep. Now,
yeah, great beyond rear suspension. It had a V6 Hemi headed engine, which was 2.5 liters. Made 180 horsepower or something like that. And was really well balanced, 50-50 balance. And this is the car where I really got the hang of the Italian driving style. Arms out, sitting back, and arms extended. And it was just a real comfortable cruise machine.
Now, how does a young gearhead, get into the world of Alfas? Because when you sent me this, I didn't know you had this Alfa, and I didn't know you did the road trip in it. But you weren't like your typical young guy cross country and maybe Camaro or in an Impala. Like, that's a very specific car. That's an Italian performance car. Hell, I don't think I ever even saw one of those back in the day. How does one come into possess one of those back then?
Yeah. Well, CJ, I'm a copycat. A friend of mine bought one, and I saw it, and he extolled the virtues of it, and so I copied. I found one of my own, and cars are, there's a lot of camaraderie in the hobby, and when you get a similar or the same make as a buddy, you have that much more to talk about and that much more to commiserate about, and share ideas around. And so a friend of mine bought one, and I followed suit. And I moved it to New York, and I joined the Alfa Romeo club. I did time trial that car at Lime Rock, and it did pretty well. I mean, I could do mid 120s around Lime Rock Park. I think the record's like 102 or something like that, a minute 2 seconds, or maybe even faster now. But on street tires, I never put slicks on it or anything, but the car just handles so well. It was such a delight to drive, and it was really a delight to drive fast. The diving turn at Lime Rock, I could just, no fear. I just, foot to the floor, and that car just handled it so nicely.
Glenn, since you brought it up, since you owned one, let's talk about Alfa. You talk about, every car, every brand has an image, a heritage associated with it, maybe some skeletons in its closet, a reputation. Alfa coming into this country over the past 5 to 10 years with the Giulia, with the 4C, with the Stelvio. I don't know that it's been a wild success. I don't think it has. Do you think some of that is the hangover from that brand reputation? Because anyway, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I think. So they had an uphill battle getting back into the market. Fiat was first with the 500, and I've owned an Abarth now for 12 years, 11 years, and I've loved that car. I think, yeah, they had a tough time getting over the reputation. By the time they came back, Alfa Romeo, I mean, who knew who they were? They entered Formula One again recently, so they had some name recognition there. And Formula One is growing in the States, so Alfa's leaving Formula One after this past season, I think. I read, and so just tough. The cars I thought were really well styled. The Giulia's a great driving car. I mean, they've got the perfect wheelbase
Yeah.
to absorb, the horrific roads we have here in the East. And it just, I test drove one and it did really, really nicely. I didn't pull the trigger on it because I love my Abarth so
Right.
much, and I'm kind of reluctant to want to get rid of it. But
Well,
yeah, no, I think Alpha just has a tough time with name recognition.
Well, to that point, I've got an Alpha story too. Maybe not as interesting as yours, Glenn, but back in 2016, 2017, we're in the market for another daily and went to the Alpha dealer in Greenwich, long story short. And
Mhm.
the young man, the sales guy, younger than me, that's not hard. But in all seriousness, he's telling me, look, Dietz, this thing is going to be the M3 killer.
Right,
This thing's faster on the Nürburgring, talking about,
right. The
the
Quattrofoglio
quadrifoglio
or
and,
whatever.
and all these
Yeah.
other things. And just, it's so much better than the BMW. And that's not why I bought it. But we did have a Giulia for a while. And what I will
Mhm.
tell you is I love that little car.
Mhm.
Sexy as hell, cool styling, but it had gremlins. It did weird stuff. And I did
Wow.
not have the quadrifoglio version. I did have all-wheel drive, but
Yeah.
random infotainment errors and like black screens and the car shutting down while backing up. They did some software updates. Maybe it's Microsoft based. No, I'm kidding. Total joke. But in all seriousness, you apply a patch and the blue screen goes away. But I don't know, man. Alphas do weird things, but cool cars.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I'm no expert in any of this, but I do have a soft spot in my heart for the brand, and I've heard those stories, and I've heard those stories about the Fiats also, and I guess I just got a good one. That it's been dead stock reliable for me. I mean, I've never had a problem with it. I better better keep knocking wood here,
Right.
but it just. I mean, its heart now is a Chrysler, right? So the engine was in the Abarth is built up in Michigan, I think, right? The
Right.
car was assembled in Mexico, but those engines. At least for the Fiat, for the Abarth, were built in Michigan. Not sure about the Alphas though, and the software glitches. Yeah, those can be a challenge. Yes, the
All right.
triple nickel,
Can I tell
Colin
my
McRae.
story? Glenn, I got to tell a story on you. Guys, Glenn, you deserve, in my view, 100% of the credit for being the early adopter, the innovator, to know what was coming. The trend around hot Subaru Imprezas, long before all these boys running around with their WRXs, STIs, Glenn, who was my boss at the time, showed up one morning with his new car, and it's what we're looking at here. And it predates all you boys think you know about STI, WRX. This man bought this car off the lot. We're talking late 90s, I think. Glenn, what's the story
Yeah,
behind this?
Yeah. So the story is, so Subaru rocked the rally world in the 90s. Colin McRae with the WRX. This car is an RS 2.5. It's not a turbo car. That was a normally aspirated engine. It was a manual. I think it was a 5-speed. Must have been. And so the local Subaru dealer, well, Subaru had this promotion to try to, get the name out and to commemorate Colin McRae's victory. I think it was 98, 97 or 98. That's a 98. And so they put the decal kit from Subaru Technica, right? The STI racing decals on the car. They pimped it up with the gold rims. It had this really nice, like, kind of houndstooth cloth pattern on the seats. And it was a real decent car, not lightning fast, but incredibly capable. The first weekend I had that car, I drove it in an ice storm to go pick up some stuff. I drove from Westchester to Long Island for an eBay purchase, and it was the weather was horrible. It was an ice storm, and that car just, there I was in my own world rally from Westchester, on the Long Island Expressway.
And you were the first. In my world, you were the first. And let's talk about a couple things. The 555 Tobacco Company, right? Cigarettes.
Yeah, right. And I guess in Europe, England, probably.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing about this car, and why I claim, the tidal wave and resurgence of interest in Subaru and the WRXs and the STI, particularly for guys a bit younger than us, the passion that they have for it. I claim, Glenn, in addition to the racing heritage and the rally heritage, comes out of video games. Like, I remember kids playing these driving video games on whatever platform, and you had the little hot Subaru that you couldn't get in this country.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, right. They definitely had a presence. And they built it up carefully over time. And, the cars are very reliable. They're held in high regard and high esteem. And by the time they, came out with the WRX, right, the turbocharged version of that car, in the States, people were ready to buy them, and they did, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they sold really well, and still to this day, right? The WRX has a lot of name recognition.
All right, listen, Magnum.
Oh yeah.
When I think about, I got to hear your story about this car, Glenn, because when I think about growing up in our era, you talk about icons. First of all, back in our era, and I know you spent some time on the West Coast, I never even saw one of these. This was Magnum PI's car. Right. This was dream car, poster on your wall, together with the Countach, on the topic of cars I will never see in my life. And then to have that, what's your relationship with this car?
Yeah. So that was my car. That's an 85 Ferrari 308 QV. It was a late model 85, one of the last. So it had what, enthusiasts look for, the dual belts, the split belts for the alternator. And so like any other kid, I mean, this car was an icon for me when I was a kid. I really, I drooled over these. I would see them around from time to time. And, they were rare enough so that when you saw them, not a belly button car at all, right? It was something special. So I owned that car when I lived in Texas. A buddy of mine had it and drove it around, but it mostly just sat in his garage and wasn't used. His nephews would play on it, when they came over, and it was collecting dust. And after a while, it just fell into disrepair. It needed some brake work, and it had a radiator or a coolant leak somewhere. And I kept chipping away at him. I asked him if he wanted to sell it, and he wasn't ready. And I said, when you're ready, let me know. So eventually he was ready. He let me know, and I bought it from him at a very fair price at that time. For a while, these cars, you could pick them up for 15, 20 grand in decent shape. The nicest ones were 30, 35.
You're kidding.
Um, no. And it's only recently that they've really popped in price.
Crazy.
And yeah, I mean, these were, you could find them cheap. People were afraid of them, and probably still are.
Well, to that point, two questions for you. One, did
Mhm.
people lose their mind when they saw you driving around this car? I know I would if someone pulled up in that. I got to go check it out. I got to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
The second thing is, what was ownership like? You hear so much about, oh, you got to pull the engine to do an oil change. Like, come on, go ahead.
Yeah, you don't have to pull the engine to do an oil change, and you don't even have to pull the engine to do the timing belts on it. But the big thing on these cars is the timing belts. It's an interference engine, so if you lose a belt, the engine's going to eat a valve. So you really have to stay on the belts, and a lot of owners of these cars replace the belts every 5,000 miles. You don't need to do that. I mean, the belts will last longer than that, but they do require regular service, and they can be very expensive to service if you take them to a competent, qualified shop or a dealer. Other than that, the car is a really incredibly reliable car. I mean, Ferrari built engines, right? I mean, that's what Enzo Ferrari is noted for. Forget the brakes, forget the suspension. It's the engine, right? And what's funny about this car is that it's very much a 50s and 60s car. That was an 85. And, underneath that beautiful skin is just this square steel tube frame. It's a very lightweight space frame. And simple to work on. Everything is very accessible. Panels come off easily. That car had gremlins, though, electrical gremlins. You could get, you can get over the electrical gremlins, replace the fuse blocks. There were, like any car, there were the things the modifications that owners of these things make. From the that they read on the bulletin boards and the chat sites, and I followed suit. And when it was time for me to sell, it had all of the nice updates that made it a reliable car to drive. And I did. I joined the Ferrari Club and used to do all the rallies with the Ferrari Club. And all the luncheons, and that was a real fun time. And I keep saying fun a lot in this because cars are fun.
Oh yeah,
and this was no exception. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, kind of getting into the ownership experience, and driving something like that is an occasion, isn't it? And you say, all right, well, why don't I go out and get a much more modern Corvette for half or a third of the price, and it's faster. Yeah, but it's a different experience. It is not the same. Yeah. It's just different. Yeah. Talk about the ownership and driving experience. Like I said, you take that thing to the grocery store, people lose their mind when they see it.
So, yeah, I guess I didn't answer your question. Yes, people, I don't think losing their minds is really the right thing to say. But yeah, people stare at it, right? It's definitely a spectacle. The late model Lambos and those cars get a lot more attention than the 308 did, but it certainly had its fans. So the driving experience, it's a very visceral driving experience. It being such a simple car, there are no bells and whistles. It doesn't do anything for you. You really have to understand the machine and how it works. It had that weird dogleg, first gear down to the left. And the gated shifter, which was in and of itself an experience. The car was just fun to drive. It had a very, very rudimentary, car feel to it. And I have to say, that's what I like about the Fiat 500 Abarth.
Mm,
It's a very simple car. It feels like that car has some assist, right? It's got steering assist and so forth, but it is a very basic car by today's standards. The Ferrari was just a bone stock simple car. There was nothing, no mystery to it. You understood exactly what you were getting into the moment you got into it.
got it. Now, Glenn, compare that. Let's put a pin in what you just said. What's life like? Life like in the 308 in a day in the life versus a day in the life of this thing. What are we looking at here?
Yeah. Right. So this was what I owned before the 308. After I bought the 308, I sold the Corvette. Another car, right? An icon. I went through all the childhood icons, right? In my midlife crisis.
Yeah.
And this thing, it was at a dealer in St. Louis. I went to see it, and I got behind the wheel, and just sitting so low in that thing, looking through those haunches, right through the fenders and over that hood. The car was not a spectacular performer. It only has 180 horsepower. It's a 1975 convertible. The urethane bumper on both ends, and the anemic V8. But it was a V8. That was a 4-speed.
Right.
And man, it had a nice exhaust, so it sounded great and shook and rattled in all the right ways. And, you just felt the ground pounding under you, even though it wasn't a high horsepower car. It wasn't going to, corner at 1G or anything. Just looking between those fender haunches.
Amen.
And hanging your arm out the window and, getting that V8 going in first gear, you just felt all the mechanicals, whirring away underneath you. And it was, another great experience. It was a fun car to own. That was not a particularly nice one. In the end, I had to do a lot of work on it, just to keep it going. But I did enjoy it while I had it.
Well, and to that point, interesting thing with the C3 Corvette, third generation Corvettes,
Yeah.
first of all, I don't think there's anything sleeker, Mako Shark, if you will. Like back in the day, for many of us, if someone said, okay, little boy, draw a sports car, you would draw these lines without even knowing it. You were drawing a Corvette.
Right.
And to your point, the haunches, you get in that thing, there is no mistaking it. Even though it's a small block Chevy. Chevy put small block Chevy in everything. But that is a Corvette, and it's just different. Now, having said that, C3 is polarizing, man, because how many of these, Glenn, and it almost breaks your heart, they haven't done well over the years. They're sitting behind they're under somebody's carport in Florida, and they're just not worth the restoration because the market's not there. It's not like a C1 or maybe a C2, some special rare car, and you're going to restore it and get rich. You can overspend restoring one of these and never get a return on your investment.
Yeah, I have overspent on just about every car I've ever owned. Right?
Well, yeah.
So I'm definitely I'm not in this for the money, right? Certainly not to make the money. If I'm in it at all for the money, it's to lose the money.
Well, yeah. And by the way, let me clarify that I'm not either, and I'm in the same boat as you. But having said that, so many of these, it's just sad because they will never be restored because it's not worth it for many people to do it. And also, this doesn't have some of the cachet and the following. Maybe they'll come back into their own. I don't know. I don't know a lot of people in our hobby, Glenn, who are like, I got to find a C3 and I can't find one and I really need one. No, there's still a ton of them out there, and it's just not. It's not the hottest Corvette out there.
No, it's not. But you know what? For like $5,000 to $8,000, you can get into a V8 powered sports car and work on it yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that, if nothing else, is the appeal of these cars, right? If you're going to turn your nose up for something like this without recognizing what the value uh, brings, to your experience in the hobby, then there's really something wrong. I mean, they're great machines. They're not that expensive to fix. Parts can be pricey for them, but they're fiberglass,
Yeah.
so those parts are still being made. Unlike some cars, almost every part is still available,
Yeah.
somewhere, and there are lots of vendors, who service those cars or provide parts for those cars. So they're a great value if for a young person looking to get into the car hobby. That would be a really good place to start.
I think you just nailed it. I love that. I mean, that's such an important message. Like, you don't have to break the bank or go into hock to get into this hobby.
Right.
C3 is a sweet spot. I agree with you. All right, so let me show you
Yeah.
this, because one, it's a vehicle that you owned, and there's a retro thing going on, but also the significance of this vehicle as part of the retro fad. Talk to us about
Oh
this
yeah.
guy.
All right. So this was the car I owned before the Abarth. I bought this. It's a Hemi Challenger. It's an RT, and I bought it brand new off the showroom floor in 2010. And this was I've been a Mopar fan, another car, right? This was another itch scratched. Mopar fan for a long time. I had a 67 Coronet. Another car that I didn't list is I had a 68 Barracuda. I've had a bunch of Mopars too, and I saw this car, Plum Crazy.
I'm crazy.
Hemi. I mean, this just at the time it was exactly what I wanted. I always wanted a muscle car. I was too young to have bought one, back in the day. A 70s model. But by 2010, I could swing it, and I did, and it was a fun car. That 160 mile an hour speedometer.
Yeah.
But the thing about this car, it was very fast. It was like 400 horsepower after a little bit of tuning, and I mean just a little bit of tuning, and it top 400 horsepower. This was another car I had in Texas when they completed the North Dallas Tollway.
You could do 160 on it. You could do 160 in Texas.
Well, yeah, I won't kiss and tell, but the North Dallas Tollway was, every bit of, the Nürburgring, So this was a fun car, but after a while, it was like driving my living room around. It was not big, but sizable. And a friend of mine told me about the Abarth, and when I drove that, I just couldn't stop laughing and giggling. It was so much fun. But this car was, I really liked it. I traded it in at 20,000 miles 2 years later for the Abarth. But I really liked it, and I would certainly own another one.
Isn't it crazy, Glenn? There's so much we could talk about with this car. Just what Dodge did, and they got it right, bringing back the Challenger with this retro styling and the Hemi and the performance. But people don't realize, I'd say people who are new to the hobby or the young bucks, up and comers, forget about 400 horsepower. How about 300 horsepower? Back in the day, you were king of the streets at 300 horsepower.
Yeah.
And to your point, like I always talk about my V6 1983 Pontiac Grand Prix. It had about 100 horsepower, 0 to 60 eventually, and could not accelerate going uphill. Like, how crazy is it that this thing, factory muscle car, looking like that, and near damn 400 horsepower? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and underrated at 400 horsepower. I mean, easily have bolted on like 200 more horsepower to that thing. It's incredible, right? I mean, growing up back in the day, 150 horsepower was a lot. Even in the 80s, those Fox-bodied Mustangs, what were they? 250, 225, 250 horsepower. 275 was a lot. So I know, incredible. By the time 2010 rolled around, they really had the horsepower had horsepower down, and the horsepower wars were in full swing again.
Crazy. All right, Glenn, check it out, man.
Yeah.
We could do this all day, and we're going to get you back on, but because your story and I've got a whole list of other cars this guy's had, and he's got a story for each one, and I love it. But Glenn, I got to put you on the hot seat now. Going to do sort of a rapid fire thing and see where it's at.
All right.
So yeah, you better get ready, pal. But so here we go. All the cars you've had, what's the one that got away? What's the one you shouldn't have sold and it breaks your heart?
The yellow Roadster, Betsy. Yep. I should not have sold the Model A. That's the one. I really do regret it. I regretted it at the time. And it was a decision I made because, I was getting married and I thought it was the right thing to do. And, it wasn't. I should have hung on to it.
Interesting. Next question. Yeah. Will Glenn, my Abarth driving, airplane flying, limousine riding buddy, will Glenn ever own, and by the way, he does fly airplanes. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, a whole other topic.
Will Glenn ever own an EV?
So I've been looking. I really like the new Ford Mustang. I think that's my favorite EV. I've driven the Teslas. I've driven several others, and I like the Ford Mustang. So I would own an EV. I think the range is right. If you think about what Elon Musk has to say about recharging. The thing about the Teslas, they tell you is, you don't charge them above 80%. And if you understand why, it's because 50% of the charge time gets you to 80%. The other 20% of the charge is the other 50% of the time it takes to charge it. So why spend half your time waiting for 20% of the charge, right? So I would. I see the utility in them, and for the kind of driving I do and the trips I take, the longest one being a 250 mile each direction trip, 500-mile round trip, often enough, that I could do that, stopping for, 30 minutes to grab lunch and charging the car, giving the car, a short percentage charge. Yeah, I could see that.
Got it. What's Glenn's dream car?
So that's an interesting question because I'm kind of, I don't know. I don't have anything that I'm lusting over right now. Exactly. I think if I were going to buy something else that was a fun car, I would look for an Alfa Romeo 4C. Those cars are really appealing to me. They're intriguing. All carbon fiber. I think there's upside to those cars in the marketplace. I think. You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Listen.
But yeah, I don't know. Yep.
4C, I could see you in that. Now, have you driven one yet or sat in one?
Yeah, I've done both. I've driven one and sat in one. Yeah, they're very difficult to get into and out of.
What are you? You're about 6 feet. You're
5'11", 5'10". Yeah, I'm shrinking my old age.
Gravity. What the hell is this with gravity? What the hell happened? But no, in all seriousness,
try to defy it and it just spits in your face. I don't know.
What's the old saying, Glenn? I don't know. It resonates with me. How the hell did I get to be the same age as all these old people?
I know. Yeah.
But 4C, man, I agree with everything you just said. And going and checking them out, it's like, is this seat literally a box of pizza that I'm sitting on? Like, and then that radio that looks like a 1982 Pioneer that they just jammed into the dash. I don't know. It is a cool car, man. I haven't driven one.
It's basic. it's basic automobilia, right? It's a sports car. It's what I think a sports car should be. You
Mm,
know, it's very simple. You know, it's like anything you might buy in the 50s or 60s. It's engine brakes and although with modern sophistication, right? But it has that kind of old world feel to it.
mm. Good stuff, Glenn. Well, listen, first things first, I want to reiterate, Glenn, thanks for coming on. You've been a good friend all these years. I don't need to
Yeah.
see you a lot, or I wish I did see you more, but if I haven't said it lately, thank you for being a great friend and a mentor and a great boss. Now, let's not make his head any bigger. I got to stop that. But in all seriousness, Glenn, we'll get you back on here. Uh,
Yeah.
Guys, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Hot Seat Automotive Podcast. Glenn, incredible guest today. Guys, give us a like and subscribe. Let's see some comments. If you got questions for Glenn or questions for me, Glenn, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, buddy. We will be in touch.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, CJ. I appreciate the opportunity. This is great. It's always great to talk to you. And yeah, I feel the same. You've been a great friend throughout the years. And, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and the family.
Thanks, buddy. Speak soon.
Okay.